Hi, this is Mrs. Daney.
And Miss Gruber.
We are going to teach you how to make your note cards for your poetry research project and why they are important to be done correctly. So, purpose of the note cards is first, they divvy up important information bullet for bullet. Next, they break down all individual points and separate them onto different cards. This helps you be a little more organized than maybe you normally would. How do we make all of this happen? You read important and relevant information which we have been gathering from the library on your specific poet and their poem or poems that you are focusing on. You highlight individual ideas from all of the criticism and research that you have been gathering. Then you write it onto the note card. There are specific requirements for making these note cards. You must write in blue or black pen, not pink, not purple, not pencil, blue or black pen. Use a 3x5 card. Do not use a lined sheet of paper. A 3x5 index card is what is considered a standard size index card. Use blue or black pen on it.
And for the record, these standards are from the Modern Language Association. They're not
our standards. This is how you conform to MLA format for note cards. Finally, you have to bold the quotation marks on your note cards. This would imply that you need to press a little more heavily with your pen and make it look like they are bold.
Okay, I'm going to go over the actual formatting of the note card and how you lay it out. So here's your 3x5 card. Notice in the upper left-hand corner, you have the word slug written. And then there's a colon. What this says is general criticism, meaning this particular note card has to do with the most general ideas about the poem. It speaks to things like overall meaning. In a second, I'm going to show you a whole list of slugs that you can choose from. Some of them are more specific, like theme or symbolism. But in this case, I use general criticism because it speaks to the overall meaning of the poem. Over here, I have the author of the critical resource. In other words, a guy named Phillips, that's his last name, wrote the research that I am now presently referring to. Notice it is not my poet. Followed by a comma, and then the page number of the source that you got it from. So if this is something like Poetry for Students, the book that you found in the library, your page number is going to be something more like 500. This is clearly a digital resource because it's only on page 2. In my quote, in the content down here that I'm pointing to, this is stuff that I read from the resource and then I paraphrase into my own words. Notice it's in blue ink on a 3x5 card. The stuff that's not in quotes is my paraphrasing. The stuff that's in quotes is a direct quote lift from the primary resource, or the secondary resource. So listen to my paraphrase. Harlem, that's the name of the poem, illustrates the consequences of what happens to a dream that is left unattained or underdeveloped. Describing possible reactions to the deferral of a dream, the consequences go from mild-mannered to threatening and finally passive. So this is general criticism because I described the overall impact of the poem. Notice I embedded the research into my writing. I find that appropriate for this particular kind of content. If you look at the notes that Miss Daney went over with you, it says here, embed quotes or write direct quotations at the top of the card. In this example that you're looking at, I embedded the quotes. Alternatively, you could have written possible reactions to the deferral of a dream up here at the top of the card and then unpacked it in your own paraphrasing words below the card. So this is how you set up a note card. Now we're going to take a hop over and look at the list of slugs that you have at your disposal.
So here we have our list of slugs that you can use on your note cards. So some of them are pretty self-explanatory. You've got ideas like this is my thesis note card. Birth and early childhood would have to do with the background information for your poet. Same thing with adult and life jobs. Moving down a little bit, we've already talked about general criticism. The poem, so at one point you will need to copy your poem onto these note cards. So On the note cards that only contain your poem, no analysis, you would use poem as your slug. Then, you will have certain instances where you provide your own personal analysis that is based off of the analysis you have also gathered from other sources. This would be an example of where you use personal analysis as your slug. Then for other formats, you have forms and devices of the poems, the themes, and then again a more general analysis of perhaps the whole poem overall. Also, slugs for personal reactions to cards and personal reactions to the research process, which we will talk about a little bit later in general. So this resource is available to you to look at directly underneath this video. So you have it at your disposal. You can print it out, keep it with you, and use it as a reference as often as you need to.
Out there in that rainforest.
I want to just remind... Sorry for that spasm of words. I just had a giggle break because Danny didn't know we were recording for a second. Anyway, I wanted to talk about how many note cards you have total. There's 20 analytical note cards. That's going to go under slugs like theme or devices or form or structure or rhythm. Then you're going to have 10 cards for personal analysis. Those are your ideas. Feel free to make up other slugs as they make sense. So for instance, if you're using a slug that says slug theme, but you have like 4 different themes you want to go over, you can organize the slugs by the different theme. So let's take a look back at this note card before we move on to the ones that go over the poem and the poem alone. I just want to remind you, blue or black ink, there is a comma separating these two. These are things you're going to be graded on in your rubric, which you can find in your green poetry packet. Note the bolded quotation marks. So let's take a look at the other example. This is how the formatting of your poem is going to look. So sticking with the same example, I wrote out the first 5 lines of A Dream Deferred, otherwise known as Harlem. That's a poem by Langston Hughes. The slug should be slug poem, because it's your actual poem. The author is your poet, because your poet wrote the poem, comma, the page number, which will almost always be 1 unless you have more than 1 page of a poem. You should separate them on 5 lines or whatever it makes sense to do by stanza. So for instance, if I have 4 lines per stanza, I'm going to separate it in lines of 4. Regardless, you label your poem every 5 lines. So every 5 lines, you should have a little number over here that's counting 5. And then you just write it in the center. This is a good resource for you to use through your dramatic reading. If you ever need a backup plan to look down at a card to make sure you're on the right track, some people do well with note cards. So you'll need at least 31 note cards. That's 20 analysis, 10 personal reflection, and at least 1 card if you have the world's shortest poem, if you have a 5-line poem. Otherwise, your 30 count will go up, reflecting the total number of stanzas in your poem. That's all I have to say. Did we cover everything?
I think we did.
Okay, good luck. Email us if you have questions. Bye.
Bye. Bye.